Today we're using a color rattle can spray paint to help us speed paint the Contractor for Nemesis Retaliation. I like using rattle can spray paints for a quick OSL effect to designate player color on miniatures. I find this more interesting than simply using a clip-on plastic base ring or coloring the rim of the base with a particular color. Of course, as we paint these miniatures to match the character art, further designating them with player color is pretty unnecessary. I don't think any players are going to have trouble determining which piece on the table is theirs. But I like painting OSL on miniatures, so we're going to do it anyway. Welcome to Treehane Miniatures. This is the first miniature that I'm painting for this series where I do not have the prototype version of this miniature. And this is probably a good thing because I think I nailed it with this paint job in a way that I couldn't duplicate with speed paints. But if you're super into slap chop, I can guide you over to another YouTube channel that specializes in slap chopping board game miniatures. I've already mentioned Coffee House Productions in a previous video, so I'd like to steer you towards Raw Paints Miniatures, where you can find a ton of miniature painting tutorials in the slap chop style. I take the same initial approach with all miniatures that I paint in this style. I like to start with a rattle can spray paint color that is slightly darker than the OSL color that I'm going for. For this light gray OSL, I'm choosing ColorForge Standard Gray. I spray this color directly over the black primer on one side of the miniature. I spray the back of the miniature from an angle that is a little above the miniature and slightly to one side. I try to do this on the least interesting side of the miniature. So for example, on this particular miniature, I sprayed the gray from the rear and slightly to the model's left. This is because the character is positioned in such a way where she is looking slightly to her right. In order to illuminate more of her face, I want the natural light coming from the character's right. This means that the OSL will have to come from the character's left. Next, I use matte white to highlight within the gray spray paint area. I begin with some basic edge highlighting, and as the amount of paint decreases on my brush, I switch to more of a traditional dry brush application. I'm not too careful about how I highlight features within the gray spray paint area. I just want to make sure not to hit any of the surrounding black primer. This is basically what I've done in my half chop videos, where half of the miniature is slap chopped with a single color to simulate OSL. These highlights are then colored with the appropriate colored speed paint, or I use a regular acrylic paint as a glaze so that it makes it look like bright reflected light. A simple glaze of ash gray finishes up the OSL effect. Depending on the shade of gray that you're using, you may not need to thin this at all. This ash gray is so light and fairly translucent for a gray color that I only thinned it to layer consistency. A darker gray color may work even better for this to achieve a more convincing gray backlight effect. This would require more thinning though, so that the bright white highlights show through and affect the gray layer. Light gray often presents as white when placed against a dark backdrop, and this mini is no exception. Right now, the backlight effect is reading as white against the black primer, but this does match the game art nicely. With the OSL out of the way, we can get to painting for real. I'm going to use chocolate brown to base coat most, but not all, of the remaining black primer on the miniature. The hair and face are obvious places to start. Beyond that, I'll apply the chocolate brown to the rest of the skin and the outer shirt that is hanging from the Contractor's forearms and around her back. I'll also hit the accessory items like belts, boots, and pouches. I'm avoiding her pants and tank top because I want these items to appear black or dark gray when I'm all finished. Therefore, I want to leave the black primer untouched in these areas to serve as the base layer. Continuing with the skin, I'll make the secondary shadow color from a mix of elven flesh and chocolate brown. This character has an unusually deep crease in her forehead, extending down and branching out to each eye. This gives her an incredibly concerned look, which I'm embracing with this paint up, meaning I'm going to allow it to remain in shadow and accentuate it. I'm not sure if this expression is true for every production copy of this game or if this is a mold error, but I really like it. It's unique. I'm also going to have a fairly dark shadow between her right shoulder and arm. These two areas will still receive this secondary shadow color, but going forward I'm going to remember that I want them to remain pretty dark. I continue to paint all bits of the skin with this color. Elven flesh is one of my favorite colors to use for fair-skinned characters. This is true whether I'm mixing it with chocolate brown, German camel black brown, or my favorite, dark plum. Painting this over chocolate brown will give the model a grittier look when all finished. This mid-tone color for the skin is where we begin to add shape to the various features of the model. I'm going to allow the shadow to become more prominent and treat this layer almost like an initial highlight layer. I'm spending more time on the skin for this character than any other attribute. Whether your eyes are immediately drawn towards the face or the tatas, the skin is a primary focal point of this piece. Before moving on to our final highlight color, I'm going to quickly tint the Contractor's complexion with a little red wash. Since I'm trying to achieve a very fair complexion, this little infusion of color will prevent the skin from looking too pasty. The highlight color for the skin is a mix of elven flesh and ice yellow. The best part about the highlight layer is that it's fast. I'm focusing my highlights toward the upper right side of the model. This means I'm drawing my strokes toward the light source and finishing each stroke at a point where I want it to be brightest. After deviating a bit with my officer paint-up, I am back to using my favorite brunette hair recipe, beginning with orange brown over the chocolate brown. I use this to paint reflective bands within the chocolate brown layer. I usually go for a kind of halo effect with this. I'm not highlighting where the light hits the hair, but highlighting how the light would be reflected towards the viewer's eye. I also use it to frame the Contractor's face by highlighting the bangs hanging along the sides of her face. Additionally, I'm using this color to highlight all of the leather components like straps, boots, and belts. This will be the only highlight that those items get. Then the hair gets a thin layer of ice yellow within the orange highlights. And that's all it takes to paint the hair. And while I have the ice yellow out, I decide to add a couple of bright points to the face, which wraps up painting the skin as well. Painting the pants and tank top is a simple grayscale progression, beginning with a base coat of Necromancer cloak. I go with uniform gray for the initial highlight color. I keep these highlights small because I want the clothing to appear dark when I'm all done. Finally, we use some ash gray to add some tiny highlights within the uniform gray layer. For the bandages on the Contractor's wrist and ankle, I'm using necrotic flesh directly over the chocolate brown layer. This is an easy application of paint that only takes a few seconds. Alright, let's move on to the outer shirt. I'm using a mix of heavy khaki and chocolate brown for this first run at it. I'm leaving plenty of the initial chocolate brown layer showing in the recesses. After spending so much time on the skin, things are really moving along now. We'll have this model wrapped up in a matter of minutes. I'm using pure heavy khaki for the next layer. With this color, I'm focusing only on the raised folds and creases in the cloth. A mix of ice yellow and heavy khaki makes up the highlight color for the shirt. These are mostly applied to the creases on the right arm that are facing up and to the miniature's right. I have a base layer of chocolate brown in place for the Contractor's air tank. I then attack it with some demonic yellow. I want the tank to look worn and dingy, like it's seen a lot of use. I scratch this into place over a couple of layers. I draw my strokes across the short diameter of the cylindrical tank, making sure not to achieve complete opacity with the yellow. Some areas will have more yellow opacity and others will allow more of the chocolate brown to show through. This inconsistency in coverage should achieve the look that I'm after. There are also 2 straps holding the tank in place, which I avoid painting with the yellow. I'm painting the metallic items, including the junk on the ground, with a blue-black gunmetal finish. I begin by base coating all of these items with blue-black pro-acryl. Then I swipe some Iron Wolf air color across most of the blue-black surface. This is still a pretty dark color, so it can cover just about everything except for the recesses. The final step for the simple gunmetal look is to edge highlight with the Army Painter Wolf Gray. All that we have left are the rounds on the Contractor's ammo belt and the casings on the floor. For this, I use yellow ochre on the high points of these items for a little splash of color that makes the miniature look complete. And now the Contractor's all painted up and ready for the table. I'd like to thank my channel members who so generously support what I do here. If you would like to become a channel member, you can do so by using the link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community that gets paid to do other people's bidding.